right, mandatory minicamp is in the books. The Bills players off on a little bit of a vacation before training camp, but the work never stops for us here at Buffalo End Zone unless your name is Kevin Carroll. He's off this week. I'm Andy Young, so we bring on a special guest to the Buffalo End Zone podcast, our good buddy Sal Capaccio from WGR Sports Radio 550 in Buffalo, Buffalo Bills beat reporter and sideline reporter on the game day broadcasts on the Bills radio network. Sal, thanks for joining us this morning as we record.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Appreciate you coming on WGR with me. We've had some really good chats over the last couple of weeks. I hope you had a great Father's Day. My son got me this T-shirt. Every time he comes home, he says, "Dad, I'm hungry." So now I say, "Hey, hungry, I'm Dad." So I got to show it off. So there you go. Shout out to all the kids who get the dad jokes, right? So
Love
that's
it.
Really cool. And boy, how about Kevin Carroll catching some strays from you this morning?
He's always going to catch a stray from me because he has more vacation than anybody I know. It does less
More
to
than
earn
Howard
it.
Simon had?
I don't know. Howard had a few more years on him. Kevin's maybe about 10 years behind Howard there, but he's working on that same train, right?
You got it. Yeah.
All right, Sal, wanted to get your thoughts on what you saw throughout the spring at Bills practices, at OTAs, at mandatory minicamp. What was one thing that maybe you came away particularly impressed with from what you saw out of the spring workouts?
Impressed with Kyer Elam's ascension a little bit here. And who knows how well it translates because he had more opportunity. But what I was impressed with was he made more of the opportunities that he had. And that's because Rasul Douglas wasn't there through the OTAs, and then Christian Benford wasn't there through the mandatory minicamps. And it seemed like every time we were looking up, Kyer Elam was around the ball or making a play on the ball. And that can only be really great for his confidence. I think that, it's no secret that, he hasn't performed it up to the level that they have hoped, but I think it's no secret that, him and John Butler seem to be a disconnect for whatever way and reason that might be. And maybe fresh eyes on him and a new defensive backs coach and Jamil Adai can be someone who connect with him a little bit differently and maybe better and get him to elevate his game. But he also is a guy that has to take responsibility for his game. And I think he's done that. That was impressive to me. And I'm excited to see where it goes here. He's still not, in the starting conversation. That's Douglas and that's Benford. But, man, if they can get a true third boundary corner out of Kyer Elam, that would be a really big benefit to this team.
What would that do for them to have that guy that's reliable? Say they need to go to an extra cornerback. Say that one of those top two guys goes down, to be able to count on him and rely on him in big spots.
Yeah, listen, I think because injuries happen, right? I mean, we know that they're going to happen throughout the year. They've happened, throughout the last several years, and that's why you see a guy like Kyer Elam who has to be pressed into duty against Jacksonville, and obviously didn't perform that well in that game, but he's had to step up in the playoffs. He's had to have these particular times, but that's always even as basically the fourth cornerback, right? Dane Jackson's been there as well. That's a guy that they've had to rely on. If Kyer Elam can play the role of Dane Jackson and he can be as reliable as Dane Jackson, oh my gosh, that would be an amazing benefit for the Buffalo Bills defense. And of course, because of all the new parts in the secondary, especially at safety, obviously with a guy returning in his third year, to have a guy that you can just plug in, understands the system and knows it right away, obviously that would be a very big benefit to them as well. So I just think that everything, and look at their roster, Andy. I mean, beyond Kyer Elam, what do they have at boundary corner? Because that's not Cam Lewis. Cam Lewis is a slot corner. He's the backup to Taron Johnson. He's a safety. I really, really do like Jamarcus Ingram. We have a funny thing on our show on the radio on WGR where I always say, I'm a Jamarcus Ingram truther. I think he can play in this league. Yeah. But I don't think Jamarcus Ingram is someone you can rely on to be your third boundary corner right now. It'd be great if, he steps up into that role. What do they have beyond that? You have Rasul Douglas, Christian Benford, and then it's really Elam and Ingram, and then it's a bunch of guys, Kyron Brown. They drafted Daquan Hardy, to Corey Couch, who I actually thought had a really good spring, by the way, an undrafted free agent from Miami. And then Kenny H. Lovely. I mean, I just think that it's something that they really need to happen here.
When you look at things where you're most concerned as you walk away from the spring workouts and everything you witnessed there, as we head towards training camp in St. John Fisher in 5 or 6 weeks, what still is the biggest lingering question for you that you're concerned about?
Well, I think it's got to be wide receiver, right? We're all wondering how that's going to fit. And look, I think that they did a decent job, but we never know until the pads really come on and they're going at complete full speed with hitting, with pads, and that timing with Josh Allen and everybody. That's got to be your biggest concern and anybody's biggest concern before we get there. Maybe that gets answered in the first couple of weeks. Maybe they play, Arizona and Miami, and we come out of the first 2 weeks going, hey, they're pretty good at wide receiver. They're set there. They have Josh Allen. He'll make it all work. Or maybe we come out of those first 2 weeks and go, man, they just didn't do enough. And we all said they didn't do enough. And now we're faced with this, situation where what are they going to do to kind of make up for it? So I think to me, that's got to be the biggest question. Now, that said, I was impressed with Chase Claypool. I think that he's going to really fight for a roster spot here. In fact, if I was to do a 53 right now, I might put Chase Claypool on the 53-man roster. I think that Keon Coleman didn't look out of place. He didn't do anything overwhelming to me impressive, but at the same time, he made a few high point grabs that were impressive. What I mean is he didn't stand out like, oh my God, wow, and he also didn't stand out like, oh my God, he's struggling, right? So he should be able to fit in really well. And then of course, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, I think those are the guys that you're going to be really safe to rely on. But I think beyond that, there's some question marks. MVS, what does he bring? Can KJ Hamler bring something to the table? He's got that one dimension they don't have, that straight line speed. So there's still a lot of questions about how these parts fit.
When we talked on WGR last week and you were gracious enough to have me on, I mentioned a comment that it's great to have all these different types of receivers and all these different toppings on the pizza, as I said. But at the end of the day, who's your pepperoni? Who's your number one? Who's your most reliable guy? Do you feel like they have a guy that's going to become a number one wide receiver this season for this team, or is it just going to be a wide receiver by committee, game by game kind of thing, depending on the matchup and who's hot and who can get open?
Yeah, this is a tricky, nuanced question, right? Because I'm going to try to answer it this way. I do think it's going to be a wide receiver by committee, Andy. I do. I think they're going to have a lot of guys getting involved, and I think that they're going to have a lot of guys with different roles. They're going to have an offense where every Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday when a defensive coordinator meets with his team to face the Bills, they're going to be like, hey, we don't know where these guys are going to line up, so we have to be prepared for everything because that's what they're going to do. I do think the guy who's going to be the number one targeted guy is going to be Dalton Kincaid, who's not a wide receiver. Mm-hmm. To me, that's your number one. That's your number one target. He's going to be very heavily involved in the offense. Now, if you just want to keep it to wide receivers, I think Curtis Samuel's got to be that guy. They brought him in here for a reason. It's not just catches, it's touches. They'll probably put him in the backfield a little bit. He's a former running back. I think they'll find ways to get Curtis Samuel the ball more often than they might find ways to get other guys the ball, but it's certainly not going to be, to me, the 160 targets that Stephon Diggs had, right? I don't think it's going to be overwhelmingly more than the next person. I think it's going to be Dalton Kincaid as your number one true guy, like the Chiefs have had with Travis Kelce the last couple of years, after Tyreek Hill. And then I think it's going to be wide receiver by committee with Curtis Samuel playing a really heavy role. And then we'll see where Keon Coleman goes as the season goes on.
I wonder about Curtis Samuel and how exactly they're going to utilize him, because throughout the workouts, you didn't see anything like crazy impressive from Curtis Samuel, but he was there and he was reliable, and you saw Josh Allen look his way on a lot of more short stuff, I noticed, throughout minicamp and OTAs. What do you make of the role that he could have in this offense?
I think that the offense overall is going to be very, very flexible and versatile, and whether you're talking Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, even Keon Coleman, who probably doesn't fit this mold as much, but Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, James Cook out of the backfield, all these guys. I think even Chase Claypool, because he can play inside, outside. I think the Bills are going to really move parts around. Curtis Samuel is going to be the number one guy for this, which is he inside? Is he outside? Is he in the backfield? Is he going in motion? Is he running deep? Is he running a short pattern? That's what I think his role is going to be. Someone who they can put him anywhere on the field, 53 and a third yards wide. You don't know where Curtis Samuel is going to line up. And from there, they can kind of do anything they want with him. He's a very smart player. He played for Joe Brady and Joe Brady's offense in Carolina in 2020 and had his best year as a pro. I don't think it's any coincidence, of course, that the Bills went out and targeted Curtis Samuel to come in and be a part of Joe Brady's offense right away when free agency started. You did cut out for me for a second. You said Curtis Samuel, right? That's
I
what
did.
We're talking about.
Yep.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure you didn't say Khalil Shakir. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm answering about Samuel, but yeah, that's what I think his role is going to be. But Andy, I think that they're going to try and do it with everybody. Like, I really think they're trying to build this offense where you just don't know where everybody's going to come from and what they're going to do on a play-to-play basis.
When you think about training camp, there's always that battle for the number 6, number 7 wide receivers, and fans get all up in arms about the debate about who's the last couple of guys to make the roster. This year's going to be interesting because while we think we know probably the top 5 guys, how those guys are going to be used is going to be interesting. So there's a little bit more intrigue at the wide receiver position, just watching how they develop and how they use those guys offensively throughout camp at Fisher.
Yeah, and, we've gone through the names. I didn't even mention Mac Hollins, right, who I think all of us probably think he's on the team.
Agreed.
He's a special teams player, and he's going to be a guy I think that's even more a part of the offense than maybe he's been in years past. A few years ago, he was a big part of the offense in Las Vegas, I believe it was. But he's played for a few teams. But I didn't even mention him. This is going to come down to what. Let's just do it right here. We got Samuel, Coleman, Shakir, Matt Collins. I think we're all pretty confident they're going to be on the team for your top 4 guys in those spots. And then it comes down to MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Justin Shorter, who was a 5th-round pick a year ago that had basically a redshirt year, Chase Claypool, who I think really looked good. He's doing everything he can to make sure this is his last chance probably in the NFL, and he wants to kind of resurrect his career. Andy Isabella, who's been here for a year. KJ Hamler, who has that straight line speed. I think Tyrell Shavers and Brian Thompson have both had really good offseasons. So to me, there's going to be a lot of decisions that have to be made on the back end of the roster. And look, those guys, they're probably not going to see the field as much as wide receivers necessarily, or whoever it is. Maybe, you shuttle guys in and out. Not everybody's going to be on the field all the time is what I'm trying to say, because you're also going to have Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox and James Cook. So there's going to be a lot of battles, obviously. That's probably the number one area where we're looking at position battles heading into, training camp.
As the Bills kind of head into this second, maybe third iteration of who they are under Josh Allen, Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, they've kind of changed the way they're doing things a little bit. And obviously Josh's big contract is now kicked in. When you look at Allen being able to elevate receivers and elevate an offense overall to that next level, do you see that he can lift the boat, so to speak, and be the tide that raises those ships?
Yeah, Andy, I'll tell you, every time I go on a podcast, a radio, a TV interview, whatever it is out of market, the question is always about, the offense. Are they going to take a step back and look at all these changes, and out is Stephon Diggs, and out is Gabe Davis, and in are these guys, and what to make of it? And will the Bills, are they in a rebuild year? Those kinds of things. You get those things all the time.
Sure.
And my answer is always the same, which is they have number 17.
Yep.
As long as they have number 17, he'll elevate people, and they'll be fine. Now, I think the question is, how much can he elevate each guy individually? How much can he be a part of their own success as they kind of put all of this together? But as long as they have Josh Allen, I'm confident that you could plug a lot of different guys in and you're still going to be okay on offense. I think the question comes down for me to what happens when the chips are down and you need that big third down? What happens in a big playoff game and you need a really big fourth quarter drive? Who are your go-to guys? How are you doing that? Because at that point in time, it can't be just relying on Josh Allen magic. You got to have a guy. Stephon Diggs has been that guy. At times, Gabe Davis has been that guy. They're both gone. So to me, that's really what this comes down to, independent of the fact that I think they'll be fine over an 18-week season plus the playoffs with Josh Allen at quarterback, regardless of who's at wide receiver.
I look at the receiver position that they're not necessarily better at the top. Of course, you lose Stephon Diggs, who, say what you want, he was still one of the best wide receivers in the league, even despite some of the decline in production, whether that was because of Joe Brady, because of Stephon Diggs' own decline. He was still very, very good last season. But I think overall they're deeper at wide receiver at the bottom end than they've been in the last few years.
I agree with that. And you have a lot of guys. Well, look what we just did, that exercise we're fighting for. Now, I guess you could say, does it really matter if you don't have the number one? Like, look at the teams around the league. The best teams in the league generally have a number one go-to guy, maybe a number one and number two. The team that hasn't, the Kansas City Chiefs last couple of years, but they have Travis Kelce, and that's where I think that Dalton Kincaid. I think any discussion we have about wide receiver has to include Dalton Kincaid. He's listed as a tight end. To me, he's going to be your number one targeted wide receiver. But you got to have a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, a quarterback like Tom Brady, who did it several years in the same kind of situation where they shuttled guys in. They didn't have the top guy. Sure, they had Randy Moss. I mean, of course, they had Edelman, who was in the slot as their guy. But they didn't, for many years, they didn't have a true number one guy on the outside. The Bills are kind of in that position right now because they don't have Diggs. They don't have Davis. So I just think that you have to kind of look at the full picture of the full roster, because I think that's what the Bills are trying to build intentionally here, trying to build this full roster of guys that doesn't just include wide receivers. They see where the market's going. They don't want to pay these $25 to $30 million wide receivers necessarily, unless you have a Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, which they don't on their roster right now.
Looking at the big picture in the AFC East, wanted to get into the hierarchy of where things stand, because obviously it's been the Bills division for the past 4 years. There's been some close calls. There's been some bigger margins of them capturing the division. Where do they fit in right now? Are they still, in your mind, the favorite? Because when you hear the outside noise from around the country, and we know all about national media and all that good stuff, but they're not necessarily the favorite to everybody, and a lot of people expect them to take a step back. Where, in your mind, do the Bills fit in the hierarchy right now of the AFC East?
They're still the best team. There's a reason Las Vegas has them favored to win the AFC East because they're the best team. They have the best quarterback. I think they have overall the best roster, but I would say that I think the Jets roster is very good. They obviously have a very good defense. I think their offensive line is questionable, and that's why I don't put the Jets quite on the tier as the Bills, because I don't know what Aaron Rodgers' future is going to be this year. You know, we were in that stadium last year when that happened on Monday Night Football with the New York Jets and Aaron Rodgers, and it was just deflating for everybody. Even as a Bills sideline reporter, I thought that we were robbed as football fans of a season to see that with the Jets and Aaron Rodgers. So I hope that he bounces back for the sake of football, for sake of the NFL. But at the same time, you wonder what a 40-year-old quarterback coming off the Achilles injury with a questionable offensive line is going to be. And that's the reason why I wouldn't put the Jets up on the Bills level. Now, if you told me right now, and you could guarantee me, Rodgers is going to stay healthy all year, and the offensive line will be okay, it'll be serviceable, then I think the Jets can challenge the Bills. I do. I just have questions that if that's the case for the New York Jets. And, there's questions off the field with Rodgers, and I'm not going to say commitment necessarily, but it's always distractions, right? There's always something going on there which kind of derails and gets the Jets a little bit off their course. So I think you always have to consider that. I think Miami's the team that's going to take the step back in the AFC East.
Okay.
Even if the Bills take a step back, I don't think it's going to be – it might be by a win, but they're still, to me, the best team. You might be fighting there for the division at the end of the year, just like they were this year, to try to have to win a game maybe. But I think Miami's the team that's going to take a step back. I mean, they lost a lot on defense. They're trying to replenish here late in free agency a bit, but they lost a lot on defense. They have a new defensive coordinator. There's a lot of parts that have to be changed around. And then, of course, you have an offensive line that has to protect Tua, just like Aaron Rodgers' offensive line, and they did last year. They did a nice job of that. But the biggest thing for me with Miami is, look, I mean, the league kind of figured them out. And that was the blueprint from the Bills. Week 4, Sean McDermott shuts down Mike McDaniel's offense. And after that, sure, they scored points here and there. They scored 70 against the Denver Broncos, right? And they had some big games. They also, towards the end of the year, did not play great offense. They didn't score a bunch of points like they were. And I think, to me, that's because the NFL says, hey, these are some smart defensive coordinators who have kind of figured them out a little bit. So I think Miami is the team that's going to take a step back more in the AFC East. I would put the Bills on one tier. I'd put the Jets on the next ahead of Miami. But, hey, I mean, Miami still has a lot of firepower, and, of course, they still have an ability to win games, and they'll still be in the thick of things for the playoffs. And then I think the New England Patriots, I'll say this about New England. As the number one guy on Buffalo radio, probably has really kind of needled the New England Patriots over the last few years.
A little shade is never wrong.
Yeah, right. And listen, I think that, going back a few years, the things I said about the Patriots were kind of proven to be true, which is it was all pretty much Brady covering up for a lot of warts. Once Brady was gone, Belichick really didn't know how to cover up those warts because he had Brady for so long. It's he didn't kind of know how to adapt. And I know I'm saying that about Bill Belichick. I get it, but the proof is in the pudding right now. And Bill Belichick is gone, and they have a new regime, and they have a new head coach, and they have new people picking all the players. And I'll say this: I think they're doing it the right way, Andy. I just don't think they're close to being there. Right? It's going to take them a couple years. I like how they're trying to rebuild that organization, but playing in this division, they're not going to be close.
It's a case of them kind of like limping out the last couple of years of Bill Belichick to see if they could squeeze a little bit more out of that turnip, and they just weren't able to. Like, they had the little run with Cam Newton there, but beyond that, it wasn't working. So I think it was time for them to reset the table and to move on from Belichick, as great as he was, and reset things. And they're finally at that point where they've come to terms with that. Like you said, now it's going to take a couple of years. Thinking about the Bills, and you said to you and to Las Vegas, they're still the favorites in the AFC East. I'll pose it to you this way. If they were to not win the AFC East, short of a catastrophic injury to one of their key guys, what would be the reason the Bills would not win the AFC East this season? Because
that the offense just couldn't sustain without the wideouts that they lost, and the schedule is very, very tough. You take a look at that schedule. I mean, you don't have a lot of margin for error. And the AFC, this is kind of a reason on top of reason. The AFC is just good. It's really good. And you got Baltimore and you got Kansas City, of course, right? Super Bowl champions. And look what Cincinnati, Joe Burrow coming back. And look at your own division of the Jets and Miami. I mean, Cleveland, oh my gosh, right? What they were able to do last year. Look what Houston, who's on the rise, obviously. There's just so so much competition going on. I didn't even talk about the teams in the South with Jacksonville and Indy if Anthony Richardson stays healthy. So I think it would be a combination of they just couldn't sustain being that extra gap above everyone, and if they take a little step back even and everybody rises a little bit, that's just enough to keep them out.
Talking about Bills training camp at St. John Fisher, the schedule was announced earlier this week. Obviously, it starts with practice on the 24th of July, ends on August 8th. What do you make of the schedule and the setup they have this year? It seems like it's even just a tad bit more condensed, and that's kind of been a trend the last few years.
Yeah, well, it feels like that. They have a lot at their own facility that they want to use in Orchard Park, but at the same time, they really value going away. So it's kind of a balance of how do we do that. And over the last few years, I think they've tried to strike that balance as best as possible with giving that, that going away and bonding experience for the players, but at the same time, making sure that you get back to work and do what you need to do back home where you have your rehab facility and all the things the amenities that come along with that. So it's been a balance, and it's very important for the fans too. And I think the organization understands that and knows that. A few years ago, Andy, we would say, oh, the Bills aren't going to go back to Fisher. Nope, they built that new facility in Buffalo, the training room. And they said, no, we really want to. And people didn't believe them, and they did. They went back. And I give Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane a lot of credit for sticking to their word and being honest and saying, no, we value it. We're going to go. But it's only for a couple of weeks or a little over that. And I do wonder, Brandon Beane said at the end of minicamp, he said they're not opposed to joint practices with another team.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, could that even happen this year? He said, possibly. Take a look at when training camp ends. It's right before they have their first preseason game against the Bears. And then nothing the next week leading into Pittsburgh. I have no idea. There's no inside info. I'm just hypothesizing here based on the calendar. I wonder if that's something we'll hear about.
I bet there could be more to come on that. We'll see. I think you're heading down the right path there. I'm thinking the same sort of thing. Talking about some of the other things going around the NFL right now, the wide receiver market and setting that price, like you mentioned at the top of this podcast, Brandon Ayuk. First, we hear that the 49ers don't want him, and then we hear another report that we do want him, but not at the price. What do you make of that situation with San Francisco, and what do you expect to happen there?
Well, I think San Francisco is kind of following the model we're seeing a few teams, including the Bills, which is it feels like they just don't want to get in the business of paying wide receivers $25-30 million, and especially if you have a couple of them that could wind up being worthy with Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel. They went out and drafted Ricky Pearsall, and they're kind of replenishing. And I think San Francisco feels, and maybe rightfully so, with Kyle Shanahan's system, you could kind of plug a lot of guys in there, right? I mean, what's the debate we always have about Brock Purdy or the debate about Tua, which is the same system, and plugging those quarterbacks in. So I think that's why that's happening in San Francisco. Now, even though they may feel that way, another team may look at Brandon Ayuk and go, well, yeah, but we're in a different boat, and we need a guy like that. So we're absolutely willing to pay him. I think the wide receiver market and the trends in the market are so fascinating right now around the NFL. You have your teams that are really willing to put their money down and spend to make sure they have those couple of top guys. And you have other teams now saying, we're not going to do that. It's going too high. We got to pay quarterbacks. We got to pay tackles. We got to pay edge rushers. We can't do that because we can find, there's so many great wide receivers out there now. We can find wide receiver 1 through 4, pay them just as much combined as a 1 and a 2 together, and we'll be just as good. And I think that's a fascinating trend that's going on.
It's interesting, too, because for years we heard that wide receivers often would take a couple of years to flash once they were drafted. And more, they're coming right in and having an immediate impact right away.
Yep. Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think that's, like, to me, you know me, I love grassroots football and going back to high school ball and Pop Warner even and coaching those levels and being around those levels. This is the game now. It's the game of what it's being played at every level of football. You can go to your local high school on a Friday night, and you're going to see air raid offenses and spread offenses. When you and I grew up, Andy, everybody wanted to be the running back. If it's not the quarterback, you want to be the running back.
Yep.
Nobody wants to be the running back anymore. You want to be the wide receiver because you're catching passes. Everybody's throwing it all over the place, and it's the thing that happens now from little kids into high school, into college, and now we're developing all these wide receivers. We're so ready to play right away.
When I was playing high school football, I mean, we were lucky to throw it 5 times a game.
Yeah.
You know, you'd run it. Maybe you had a receiver who could get over the top, and you'd do some play action. But you're right, 7-on-7 is the way things have gone. That's a constant pressure, and then they're just finding a way to use athletes, right? Because you only have one running back on the field and one quarterback, but you get 4 wide receivers or 5 wide receivers. Get your athletes on the field and let them make plays.
Yeah, no doubt about it, and that's why you see, I think the trend now is that even putting a lot of these athletes at tight end, right? Look at the tight end ascension that we've seen. Now we used to have a little bit of that too with the Jimmy Grahams, the Antonio Gates. These were freak athletes. I think now we're just seeing it all over the place. Look at what Laporta did last year. Look what Dalton Kincaid did. Look at this influx of tight ends over the last few years. Michael Mayer and some of these guys that are drafted really early in the draft, because I think you're taking these athletes who can just do so much and they're so flexible inside, outside, block. That's become kind of the new trend.
I know you're a big golf fan. What did you make of the finish of the U.S. Open and the way that Rory McIlroy kind of gave that thing away and Bryson DeChambeau did what he had to do, and what a likable guy he's become after being one of the more controversial figures previously in his career?
Yeah, I would say that Bryson's grown on me, and I think that he has for a lot of people. And what we saw over the weekend and how he was able to kind of come back after losing it himself and maintain, and the shot he hit out of the bunker, pretty cool. But it was at the expense of Rory. I really like Rory, but man, that was devastating to watch. That was really, really tough to watch from Rory's standpoint. I honestly, it was Father's Day. We had gone out to dinner, and we were at a restaurant watching the end at the bar TV before sitting down. And I looked at my wife. I said, I don't even know who I want to win this, because I really want to see Rory win after 10 years. But, man, Bryson's so fun right now to watch, and that's how much Bryson's grown on me. I didn't love that Rory took off right away and didn't talk to the media, but that's okay. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and kill him for it. He released a statement, because I think that, to me, if he just goes up there and talks right away, he kind of ends it, and he doesn't have to talk about it the next time the media's with him. But you have to think about this now, Andy. You know the way this works. Even though he released a statement, because he left right away, as soon as he's back in front of a microphone, even 3 tournaments down the road, he's got to go relive that now. Mm-hmm. If he would have done it right away, I don't think he has to relive it. So, I told the story on the radio the other day about Chris Webber and calling the timeout in the national championship game. And I remember the Fab Five documentary where I think it was the SID maybe for them or one of their assistant coaches said to Chris Webber, this 18, 19-year-old kid, and he goes, Chris, you got to go talk to the media. And Chris Webber did not want to do it, of course. He said, Chris, I'm going to go with you. You got to do it once. You do it one time, and it's over. And I thought about that with Rory, because now he opens himself up to all the criticism, and anything anybody wants to say with him about him is fair game, which maybe he could have kind of gone the other way with that.
Right. It's going to be weeks of talking heads and guys like us having this conversation, and
that's right.
Then it's going to be the
and
story
him
again.
About it.
Right. And
that's
when he's back in front of a podium at his next tournament or whatever, it's going to be the same thing again. So I think you're right. From a PR perspective, probably not handled the best, but from a human perspective, we've all had those moments where you just don't want to deal with it. Like, I got to get out of here. I'm so upset. I just choked away a great chance at my first major in a decade. I can't do it right now. So I get both sides of that. And before we go, Sal, NBA Finals, Celtics, they absolutely cruise. I thought this was going to be more of a series, but Boston really proved that they are just far and away the best team.
Andy, I grew up a Lakers fan. Yes, I know.
I knew you were. I didn't want to say it.
That's okay. Not a huge Lakers fan. Not totally, oh, my God, let's go Lakers, right? But when the NBA, when I was a kid, the NBA was on once a week in Buffalo, and it was either the Lakers, the Sixers, the Celtics, or the Hawks. Pretty much those 4 teams. So I gravitated to the Showtime Lakers. Oh yeah, Magic Johnson, Showtime Lakers. So I grew up really not liking Boston. But the other reason is because when I grew up in the 1980s, the Boston Bruins were the hated rival of the Sabres in the Adams division and playoffs. And then I'm also a Yankee fan, so I can't like anything Boston. I hate the fact that Boston won the NBA title. But I'm going to tell you, I really like a lot of their players.
That's
Jason Tatum,
yeah,
Jaylen
fun
Brown,
team.
Yeah, Drew Holiday. I mean, I love Derek White, what he does. He is such a glue guy, and it's so cool to see kind of a guy like that just, go and ball out when he has to in those situations. So I'm not super duper upset because I think that's a fun team with personalities and good guys to root for. But I just hate the fact that Boston, the city of Boston sports fans have another title in their pocket.
Right. Well, what a drought they've been on. They haven't had one in 4 years.
I know.
Crazy.
For sure.
Yeah. Sal, what do you got going on during this little break between minicamp and training camp? What's up with you? What do you got going on in the works?
Well, you know what? I'm never really off. I do my show on WGR every day from 10 to 12. You and I are talking here before I go on the air, and that's actually going to be one of my topics today about teams that you kind of hate to see win, but maybe you actually have a little bit of a soft spot for them, and maybe we can get some calls on that today because I think it's interesting with me with the Celtics. I thought about that a little bit. But you know what? 10 to 12 every day on WGR. But I also there's a bunch of different kind of golf events that I'm a part of and emceeing and for charity and auctions. So my bosses at Odyssey are great with me to kind of take a few days here or there to be a part of those things. We got the Evan Wood Foundation golf tournament coming up. It's the BNL Wholesale Tournament. It benefits, the Evan Wood Foundation. That's on Thursday. I'll be playing in that.
Awesome.
I've got another one coming up in a few weeks. I'll be playing Coaches versus Cancer in August. I'll be doing that down in Olean at Bartlett Country Club. So try to get as much golf in as possible. And, of course, that includes going to Rochester. But the big thing is, holy cow, dude, baseball, baseball, baseball. My son, I'm the head coach of his house team. I'm the head coach of his travel team. And I wouldn't have it any other way. It packs up our nights, but you know what? It's awesome watching them out there, and I'm cherishing this time with them.
The best part is the pay's good too, right?
Yes, absolutely right. and we never get any texts from parents about why somebody's not playing in a certain position.
Never,
that
ever.
Never happens.
All right. Hey, Sal Capaccio, WGR Sports Radio 550, and Bill's sideline reporter on the Bills radio broadcasts. Thanks so much for being here. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of Buffalo End Zone. We'll be back with Kevin Carroll sometime when he ever shows back up to work. We'll have much more coming up as we lead into training camp. But for now, that's going to do it for Buffalo End Zone.